update. It is July 15th, 2020. Thinking about the law of attraction some more today. And yeah, my last video that I made, which was, I think, very interesting. And it helps you understand emotionally the law of attraction, how it works, and the importance of like maintaining focus and devotion on certain ways of being for them to manifest, for you to manifest properly. And yeah, I was thinking about just being more open and authentic, and what else? Yeah, like manifesting things, but also like accepting things, and the polarity of otherness. It's like, unless we have the law of attraction in our minds continually, we'll actually become more divided. And an example of that is like with this the Black Lives Matter movement. We become so focused on our rights and our vulnerabilities and our victimhood, and we all feel that in part. But whenever we witness injustice firsthand, then we tend to make it a problem bigger than it is, and we justify things like group identities. And what happens when we justify group identities? We actually become like the opposite, because we're compensating for the victimhood. And so our reflective, like in reflection of that vulnerable nature, that vulnerable part of ourselves, we have to compensate for that. So then we become these totalitarians, and the more we feel like we need to have rights, or we need God, or we need anything, it's actually the energy of neediness that takes over, if we're not in that practice of mindfulness, that we begin to actually become totalitarian. And that's where like extreme leftism can become extreme, can become totalitarian, can become its opposite. And where when things get extreme, they tend to dissolve, because you're just suppressing your conservative part of you, and the conservative part of you is going to just become more extreme in the other direction. So you just end up being stretched in two directions of victimhood and responsibilities, or your rights and responsibilities. Those two things stretch when you become a victim, and because you're stretching in order to become competitive, in order to deal with that situation. But what we have to do is just take breaks from social media. We have to go into nature, and then we can actually bring those two together a little bit more. We become more whole again. And if we're mindful, then we can actually see ourselves doing that. We can become conscious of our consciousness, or conscious of our emotional state. And so what does that look like practically? Well, it became obvious when I was in this conversation on Facebook, and I brought up the law of attraction with all Black Lives Matter post, and people took offense at that, and they said that's a totally different subject. So that's what happens when you're not focused on the law of attraction, is you don't understand the connection between that. And when people say like that's polar opposite, like, let me slow down for a bit. When I say that, like the law of attraction, when I say what you resist persists to like somebody who's protesting, well, first of all, it's not the best first thing to say that I've learned, because if somebody's protesting, they're probably not in that energy of the law of attraction or manifestation in the first place. And that's why it's like the kingdom of light is the kingdom of creation and manifestation. So you have to be in the conscious mind and not in the emotions in order to manifest, because the conscious mind has to keep track of the emotions, and you have to actually feel the things you want to manifest. So you have to feel the positivity, and it's not always healthy to do that right away. Some people actually do need to feel like victims, because they actually are victims sometimes, and then they need to bring in the healing, and they need to express those negative emotions so that they can come back to a place where they can manifest. So it's not like you can just decide to start doing this in all these cases. It's actually not healthy just to decide to forgive, or else you could just be, because as you might be an actual victim of a crime. You don't want to become an enabler of that crime by talking about the law of attraction all of a sudden. But that doesn't make it untrue. And so, but the point I wanted to make was, if you are that victim and it's not going to feel good to think about the law of attraction, and you're actually going to think it's a completely different subject altogether, when it really it's the when you say it's like the polar opposite, it's just a different end of the energy. It's just a different end of that same magnet. Right? It's the polar opposite. Poles are poles apart, like people would say that, right? Well, you've given it away right there, right? So I thought that was interesting because people don't see that they're actually perpetuating the same energy when they get injured, because it's an injured person who lashes out because misery needs company, and then it's the person who is injured by that person who takes on that energy. And unless you're in a place of forgiveness or acceptance and non-attachment, and of course you can't give up your desires completely. And this is like, again, with the Buddhism, it's like the desires come into that, because if you just give up your desires, soon you'll realize that desiring to give up your desires is a desire. So then it's like, oh, you've figured it out. So then Buddhism becomes known as the middle way, because you have to actually, it would be too extreme to actually get rid of your desires. Because that's like getting rid of your emotions, and you need to express your emotions sometimes. And it's actually, those things have some grounding in reality and biology and stuff like that. So to actually experience that, some of these energies, you'd probably actually have to die, right? So then the mindfulness is really about accepting the foolishness and the wisdom of life, and then you can manifest things more easily. And the foolishness, by that I mean the victimhood, people fighting for rights, and at the same time the wisdom of taking responsibility for your own happiness, taking responsibility for providing for your own future, and meeting your own needs in the way that you can in your relationship with yourself, and to accept all those different parts of yourself. To me, that is the self-love, and that's you taking responsibility. And so yeah, and spirit is like 50% of that. So as this guy was saying on Ascension group, and And as we understand our energies, we'll see that our ideologies aren't so good either, because there's always problems with ideology. And those ideologies basically is synonymous with the taking responsibility for yourself. So in an ideology, by that, like Jordan Peterson says that ideologies are wrong. And the reason he says that is because when you take on an ideology, that is when you end up, at least the way he's interpreting it, the ideology is a set of beliefs, is a belief system in order to figure something out. And it's not good to have them because actually the authentic self is destroyed, the creative mind is destroyed, and because there's always the unknown and there's always new information. So an ideology is wrong, or a belief system even is wrong, when it doesn't allow for new information and when it doesn't accept new information. And that's why a lot of religions fall apart, or they need to change over time as well. So that's why, like, it has to take into account the sincerity. And if somebody claims that new information has actually destroyed the religion, then it has to also have the open mind to consider that new information, because otherwise it's going to fall apart even in worse ways when the new information does take over and is creating better energy in larger portions of the population in other ways. And so that's in the same way, that's like how universal truths will remain after the superficial truths, which are the ideologies, which would be interpreted as ideologies. From a psychological perspective, they would fall apart under the universal truth, which is what our religions are trying to get to. And that's what I was actually going to talk about, is my intellectual journey from religion into this mindset where I'm actually open to astrology and new age energy healing, and open to, like, why am I open to these things if the Bible, like, condemns astrology? Well, the short answer is the Bible was written for Israel, and the law of Moses was only written to Israelites. So, but the beginning of my journey was basically, I grew up in this liberal Christian family, studied the Bible in my teens. Right as I got a little bit older, I went and saw miracles on the streets with a friend, and I really understood how love transforms a person so that they believe everything will be okay. And in this way, this actually, for my personality type, it set me free to explore new information. So exploration is my passenger and authenticity is my driver, right? So, and on the Enneagram, I'm the iconoclast, so I tear down the false images for the sake of the truth underneath. So that's why I'm always been so interested in figuring out what the parables mean, what is the meaning of the hero's journey, what do the myths actually tell you psychologically, and what's their effect, and where did they come from? And the more I study, the more I realize a lot of these archetypes are based on nature, right? So it's it was the ancient sciences, and and as I learned about those, and as you study history, especially ancient history, in the actual context, with like audience relevance in the Bible, that's the more you see that it's not much different than the other world religions, because it's talking about the divine nature, and that's in every human. But back to the healing, I saw hundreds of healings on the streets. It was basically undeniable. I still believe miracles are possible. At least some of the healing stuff was pretty much miraculous. Maybe could be explained as like placebo effect. But energy has power, and if you can take a risk, and you can take your authority over your energy, and you can speak to sickness itself and tell it to go away, or you can speak to the body or something and you can say, be healed, or do this, that energy will manifest itself, whether it's a little bit, 10%, 50%, sometimes it's 100%, like legs growing out, stuff like that. I believe anybody can do that, and it's the power of the faith. And the way it's interpreted in healing would be risk. In philosophy, it might be just believing things will go well for you, or law of attraction, that might be what it means. but the faith as a healing practice means it's actually you taking your energy, you're commanding something to happen, and you're believing it's going to happen, because that's how energy works. It's not just even asking for it, and then it's commanding it, and then expecting it fully to happen. And that feels good to the masculine consciousness, because then the universe takes on this feminine role where it has to trust you and do what you say. So the feminine energy would be submission in the Bible, but maybe that's a little bit sexist in some context. But it's the same way with your emotions in the Platonic philosophies, which aren't necessarily true today. But anyway, I could talk about the miraculous more, but that kind of led me into a place where where I ended up getting invited to speak in front of 300 pastors in India. I actually ended up buying a plane ticket, and I was going to go with my friend, but then this Korean cult came to our door. I started doing Bible studies. I ended up not taking this flight to India because I was asking God for wisdom, for truth, to understand the scriptures. And really this was, looking back, it was because I didn't trust myself. And like I was trusting that things would go well for me. So like it was through that idea that I trusted myself, but it was naive, I would say. But I did learn something, and I knew I would learn something. So so what I learned was, after 9 months in this cult, and I have their books here, basically I learned about Seventh-day Adventist eschatology mixed with sort of like a Mormon mother god idea and a Korean second coming of Jesus, and it's all through the Bible. And you can make the Bible say almost anything if you don't look at the actual historical context, and but even the history is a bit weird. So it's kind of a mess. But and the fact that it is a mess to me, that's evidence that it's mythology right away. And especially when it fits into a lot of astro-theological archetypes. like coming on the clouds and not in winter, and it's just all these sun languages and all of the events in the Bible that line up with stellar events in the zodiac and all of the astrological themes of the zodiac too. Like the motto of Aries is "I am." Well, that's the Lamb of God, or how the 12 tribes line up with the 12 signs of zodiac. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Rabbit holes, right? So in 2016, I finally got out of this group, right? And they believed that the spirit was what they were teaching. They're like, our teaching is this book, and it's the same thing the Mormons teach, is the fruit of the spirit of the prophet Joseph Smith was the Book of Mormon. It's kind of like that, but with this guy On Sung Hong, and I think it was part of this mind control movement in the 60s, and but they would use these topics from the Bible to prove their point. And I think they created fake news and fake evidence to continue their cult. And then I got out of there because I saw what it was doing to my loved ones, and I saw that there were inconsistencies and oddities with their interpretation of what I was reading in the Bible. Fortunately, I trusted myself enough to do that. I think it's part of my personality type too. And my dad's coworker kind of predicted that I would leave this group. And I did. And so I had a list of these weird things, and once I had that list, I eventually got so long that one day I actually read through it, and I'm like, wait a minute. And then this other thing lined up with me reading that, which was an opportunity to buy the house I'm actually living in now. And as those things came together, it was an opportunity for me to get away, separate from this cult, and study the Bible for myself, with critical thinking. And you have to get away from the alpha beta influences, which is the totalitarian and the victimhood, or the good cop, bad cop frameworks that destructive cults use. And once you're separated from those for at least, I would say, a month or two, to really sort of calm your mind and get it thinking creatively again. Some people need 4 months, but if they're young kids who don't have any previous knowledge or any critical or opposing ideologies to test it with, then they'll go back to that group. And that's what I've seen too. So it's not necessarily like, well, there's a set amount of time for that. But and then I went on to study more eschatology because I had a lot of questions, and I was still considering myself a Christian at that point. It wasn't until about 2 years later that I left Christianity. And it was it was just one day it was like, wait a minute, this isn't really actually making sense. And so I still had some questions, but as I looked at the answers, it was almost like there's a few weeks or months where it just kind of, no, this isn't quite historical like I thought it was. And I kind of went into like a depressive energy because I was focused on these critical ideas, which is almost like what people should do when they choose any totalitarian ideology or religion or cult. When they join any group like that, they should look at both sides of the argument, and that's not what I see people doing. People only look at the arguments for it and not the arguments against it. And but also people just don't have time to do all that. so but that's another point is it's like we don't have enough time on the earth to figure these things out intellectually. That's another reason why I became a mythologist, right? Because you don't have to, you don't have an agenda for the intellect anymore. And that's what my teaching really has become about, is to free people from the need of that. So I'm actually using the intellect people already rely on, and then I'm guiding them, and I'm trying to create a whole system to like take people from that place I was, or just even tell my story like I'm doing, and show you that I went from that system to where I am now. But it's a very complex journey because like there's so much going on in my head with all of this. But yeah, so I ended up watching the Last Days series when I got out of this group by Jonathan Welton, and I basically went and read all of his books. He's a partial preterist, and he talks about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and he's mostly quoting evidence. He has in the free book Raptureless. But after I studied his books, I thought about taking his online course, but then I became a full preterist because that's where the logic takes you. Just the verses in the context is that all things would be fulfilled, and it seems like partial preterists don't realize that the redemptive narrative of the Old Covenant Israel and what they were expecting in their last days, and how it was the same as what the New Testament is teaching. And you end up with the Gentiles are actually the scattered Israelites who had been lost from the 12 tribes, and brought back into the 12 tribes. And I realized that those Gentiles, which is from a French word goy, which actually has a meaning tribes, I realized that that was similar to like this concept of the houses, because they're also called houses and tribes, or it would be synonymous. And then I realized that the astrological signs were called houses, and that there are 12 of those as well, and that Genesis 49, the blessings are based on the 12 signs of the zodiac. So then I realized, wait a minute, Israel is the zodiac, and they're the apple of his eye, and it's basically as above, so below. But the as above, so below in its origin is about the human body and the zodiac, or the cosmos, the universe as a whole, in relationship to the self. And that's where like the law of attraction is. So this is all behind a lot of the parables. And what took me to get there was actually it was full preterism, but it was not just full preterism, because full preterists are still Christians, which is weird. But it was actually the Israel only doctrine. And once I saw a debate between these Israel only people and the full preterists, and I watched the Israel only doctrine people win, because common sense tends to win. Because yeah, it's like, well, it kind of makes sense that this narrative was for Israel, and it was like this temple text, and there's some really interesting debates. But I think preterism itself is more prolific than a lot of Christians even realize, because it deals with like every verse in the New Testament, and it's been studied for decades now. So I don't think people quite understand that. But it's still not the truth, because it hasn't compared the mythologies. Let's just say that. It hasn't compared mythology to, right, these guys are still focused on what they grew up with the Bible and their tradition. And until you test two traditions like Buddhism against Christianity, you can't quite see the universal truths behind them, or the divine nature of the individual behind them. So yeah, I went from actually thinking the end of the world was talking about something way in the future, to something way in the past to realizing, wait, that thing in the past was actually the end of an astrological age. So then I realized, well, timing determines nature. This book is a book of astrotheology, and that's what you see with the covenant transition periods. Is it's actually based on astrological cycles. Another way to put it is, like, I was questioning, okay, how do I fit into the kingdom of God, like in my Christian mind? How do I make sense of miracles if I don't even understand myself or my history? And that's a good way to understand yourself, is to understand your history. So then I went into eschatology, because apparently we're in the last days and we got to figure out what we're supposed to do in the last days. But then I realized, well, the last days is back here. So then I had to study, okay, what's going on back here? And if that's not true, then what is the last days, or what time are we living in now? What's my context for living? And once you study, okay, well, what's the last days? You look at all the time statements. You look at the 7 feasts. You realize this is like agricultural celebrations. This is a marriage of the heavens and the earth. You realize this is like mythological archetypes that come out of Egyptian astrotheology, like Newton Geb, or as above, so below. And so that's actually all like the law of attraction or mirroring. It's called the mirror is like the clouds above the sky, like a hard mirror. It's in the book of Job, the oldest book in the Bible, but it's in the Lord's Prayer and with the New Testament, where he says, "On earth as it is in the heaven." And so Jesus actually is teaching the law of attraction there, and his whole Lord's Prayer actually goes through all the signs of the zodiac, which is cool. But the law of attraction is actually very interesting, because that also shows you your authority, and it's actually a part of like emotional psychology too. What are you focused on? That's going to end up displaying these things called the fruit of the Spirit. And Jesus said that the fruit of the Spirit is how you know the true teachers. So you end up having the people who have the most joy, or should be like the mythologists who have graduated from this mystery school of the Christian Bible. And that's really what it is, because this term, the mysteries, was thrown a lot, or around a lot in the first century. So I'm seeing the Bible more as like these mysteries, or it was like this Gnostic alchemy almost. Those two things are conflated or relate, right? They had similar ideas and similar beliefs. And the alchemy was like a 17 centuries long tradition, as I'm learning from Jordan Peterson. And it's about the transmutation of the metals into gold, and that's where you kind of get some of this language in the Book of Revelation as well. But a big piece for me coming out of like that cult in 2016 was checking my facts on like when books were written, because again, timing determines nature. And when you learn that the Book of Revelation was, well, probably written before the destruction of Jerusalem, well, now it can be actually about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then what is Jerusalem now? Because the whole New Testament is based on this second Exodus theme. And then that calls into question the whole history of Josephus. It's like the prickly thorns before they cross the Jordan towards the end of the Exodus. Well, that's almost copied in the history of Josephus with the Nero's persecution of the Christians between 68, 69 AD. And that would be like that would be the 38th and 39th year, between that 30-year gap of Jesus' ministry and 70 AD. So it's all the numerology there is, I feel like it's trying to tell us something, and that these dates are probably not 100% accurate, or maybe the Flavian cult was trying to create some propaganda and a lot of these stories were obviously handcrafted. Um, and there's that book, Jesus Christ, Son of God, which was a 15-year project, and it really does a good job of showing how like the Gospels were handcrafted with like sacred geometry and these mathematics and like the liberal arts of the Greeks. These people are very intelligent. The Gospels are probably like these plays or rituals or temple texts, and a lot of Egyptian themes, a lot of even quotes that seem to come right out of older myths. But yeah, it was the dating, and then it was right into preterism. So I have all these preterist books, and I have all these astrotheology books on the shelf behind me. And that's why it says on my Facebook page, I'm syncretizing these two things. Because I think understanding the time statements really does help you understand the astrotheological cycles and what age we're actually in and stuff like that. And what the last days actually mean. Like the last days were actually the age of Aries, or Aries. Like people think, well, we're in the last days of the age of Pisces, going into the age of Aquarius. Well, yeah, but that's on the next cycle, right? And I guess you can make sense of that, but it's important to distinguish that, okay, this is the second cycle. This isn't actually what the Bible's talking about. And I'm not sure I've seen a lot of people research that. So, but it's like, I'm studying all this stuff, not many people understand. Like, the community of preterists probably, I don't know, over 10,000 people at least. I think Christians who've studied the Bible and then they're like 80 years old. I've talked to some of them, and they're finally kind of taking on the preterist views. If you studied it that long, I don't see how you wouldn't see some of the mythology. But yeah, I guess you don't really need to either, because you can still see it as mythology, and it'll actually strengthen your belief in the spiritual stuff and the energy, and so, and I think even Jesus could still exist as a spirit, but he could just be, but maybe he has a different name, and maybe because Jesus isn't his name anyways, it was a Yehoshua or whatever, and but yeah, he's definitely like a solar symbol to me, more than a spirit, because the narrative is a solar cycle, and that's what I think is important to discern. So once you realize that, you can actually see how you can actually have more compassion on all kinds of religions, and you can free yourself from sticking to some ideology that's going to save you from eternal hellfire or something like that, which isn't really sincere, I would say, or genuine. So yeah, and then now I kind of want to study the Exodus theme some more, and maybe I can like put that whole journey into a book and actually go through these doctrines, like the Thessalonians, the Book of Acts, like Romans, certain problems in there that people are running into, not seeing the Israel only doctrine in some of these verses, because the Israel only doctrine fits so well with the ancient astrology that I think it'll just paint a really beautiful picture and help people understand this text, and it really helps expose like the orthodoxy or the like Catholic Church told lie after lie, and it's disgusting to me. So yeah, so anyway, we'll see what happens. If you watch this, thanks for watching. It's like, I mean, a lot of people probably aren't going to watch this unless they're like super into the Bible or studying this specifically. But yeah,